Welcome. You are listening to Empowering Educators, a podcast about purpose driven education brought to you by Voice of Purpose. My name is The Real Sun, and I have on the line with me today Gitz. Welcome, Gitz.
It's good to be here.
Good to have you. So Gitz is a youth worker based out of Calgary and did a significant amount of work down in Fort Mac as well before the fire took place. And I've had the privilege of working with Gitz when I was working with the Royal Conservatory Learning Through the Arts program. Went up to Fort Mac and was able to collaborate with Gitz, working with several of his students and groups that he had already been involved with in terms of, in particular, the indigenous community that was out there, or that is out there. Yeah, Gitz is of Blackfoot-Dene background, and he is here to share with you some of his insights about his role as a mentor, as an educator. Welcome. Do you want to give our listeners a little bit of a background of who you are and the work that you do and how you perceive yourself as an educator?
I'm 32 years old. I'm Dennis Soothene, and I'm Blackfoot. Graduated when I was 19, and I've been working with kids since then. 32. It's like wow, 13 years. Um, I, my experience first began working with kids was when I was with Ghost River, and we would do games and facilitation, and then we would all sit down and talk about and debrief the experience we had. We'd sit down and debrief challenges that we had. We would sit down and we would talk. We'd formulate ideas, we'd carry them out, and then we would talk after. And I always felt that was super powerful, that debrief process. And I carried that into the other aspects of youth working. Um, I guess what my main thing to do is I love creating programs that reintegrate youth, indigenous youth, back to their identity. And I love creating programs where problems are going to naturally pop up and being there to mentor youth as and navigate them, help them to navigate through this problem, resolve
Mm-hmm.
the issue, or to use it as like a learning block or a building block in their own personal lives. As to see myself as an educator, it's kind of hard for me to say that because from a cultural point of view, we have wisdom keepers, and there's some of them are elders, some of them are young, but I'm definitely not one who runs ceremonies. Like I don't run ceremonies, so I wouldn't consider myself an educator. I might
Hmm.
know some stuff about it. I might know a little bit about this, a little bit about that when it comes to ceremonies, but not enough to competently run a ceremony or have or gifted the privilege to run a ceremony. So I wouldn't consider myself an actual educator. That's
Mm-hmm.
for like
Just based
that's for the older
on
people.
the cultural context of the lineage that you're coming from.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, the role that I would fit into is like an older brother or an uncle. You
mm.
know, that's where I place myself.
Right. And a part of that work is, being in the classroom sometimes in the schools, partnering with teachers and working with young people, delivering workshops and facilitation and that kind of stuff, which I've seen you do, which you're brilliant at. I love the way that you are able to kind of always bring it back to remembering some of those core teachings around, the workshop that we did was centered around the ecosystem, I think, and the economy. And our teacher that we were partnering with asked us to focus around the economy. And since we were in Fort Mac, we focused on the oil industry and the impact of the oil industry on the local ecology of the area, not just the monetary aspect of it. Um, so you have a little bit of a background around purpose-driven education from some of the things that we discussed earlier. I'm really interested to hear what your perspective is on purpose-driven education, this understanding that, the purpose of education through the PDE lens is that it should be to help young people identify, align with, and build the skills to pursue their true purpose in life. And I'm wondering how you resonate with that in the work that you've done, and also, yeah, what your perspective is on it.
Wow. I think that I was actually post secondary, trying to get my social work degree, and I dropped out. I had like a few classes left. Um, but there was a realization of how deeply entrenched we are into white supremacy and
Hmm.
colonization, and that's still ongoing. I mean, the CFS, the Children and Family Services, is um, the new residential schools, and some people say it's even worse than that, and it's still ongoing. On some of those things, where you be like, yeah, well, it's time to get over it because it's literally still happening.
Yes.
Um, and so I dropped, and I remember I was like, well, I have to go back and I have to start helping to teach kids at least bits of truth, because that's what would fulfill me. And part of that was residential schools. My mom and dad are both survivors, and there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of lies. There's a lot of half truths um, that the within the media, within the education system, they keep they just perpetuate this idea that it wasn't that bad. And only over the last few years are we kind of understanding how deviant they really were, how horrific those places really were.
Hmm.
But prior to like the apology, people, I had like teachers saying it didn't happen. It wasn't that bad.
Right.
And so, and this is like before the apology when I first started working with Learning Through the Arts, because they gave me the opportunity to go into classes and really challenge teachers, challenge the district, challenge the students to really grasp a different light and a different understanding.
And when you say
For me,
apology, you mean when Stephen Harper kind of officially apologized to the indigenous populations of Canada, saying that they did wrong
yeah, I mean, yeah,
with the
like
residential school specifically, right?
there's this really interesting thing though. I mean, even the apology is a little bit deviant.
Mm.
Like I said, colonization never stopped. If you look at the way they worded it, they said like cultural genocide, um, and specifically leaving out the word genocide. And I don't use the word light. I don't use that word lightly at all. There are so many sacred dead from the Jewish Holocaust, from the Rwanda massacre, from the Armenian massacre. From these genocides that happened.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't ever use that word lightly or throw it around. Um, but if you look at the way he worded it, cultural genocide, that was a backdoor agreement between them and the UN. Because if they admit to genocide, then everything begins to change in the structure, much like Germany did. Once they had to admit that they committed genocide, they had to start redoing everything within Germany, from the academic structure, media. I mean, that's you can't even have Nazi propaganda in Germany on anything really.
Hmm.
If it's out, there's a serious fine. I mean, they had to redo their whole entire history books. They had
Right.
to re-educate the population. That didn't happen in Canada because they
Right.
never they never admitted to actually committing genocide. I think they said cultural genocide, um, but I mean, even forcibly removing kids from Group A and forcing them to Group B and having to re-educate them, demonizing their identity. That's laid out directly in the Declaration of what genocide is.
And that's
I mean,
interesting.
so
Sorry to interrupt, just to say, inject a little point in here about the essence of what happened during the residential school system is, yeah, like you said, a stripping of identity, right? The meaning of cultural there was an actual genocide and there was a cultural genocide, and the cultural genocide aspect of it is, stripping somebody of their own identity. And I find that very interesting in the context of understanding purpose driven education, and saying that our primary component, or one of the key elements of PDE, is to help young people identify, like come to a place of understanding their own identities and their very unique space of identity that they take up. So yeah, I just find that kind of very interesting that,
oh yeah, I mean that like to bring it back. I mean, for myself, it's you can't have truth without reconciliation.
right,
So it's like the colonization thing's still present, and the only thing I can
absolutely,
do is affect these like young minds in a very good way and try in a positive way, not to like go through this emotional guilt trip, but I mean just to say like this is the way that it really was, and only
right,
when you have that actual knowledge are you able to really look forward, because everything beyond actual truth, all you're doing is just living in an illusion. Which you strip away the illusion, you can actually progressively look at the next steps.
right.
Um, and that's the thing, is like the identity was completely stripped from all indigenous peoples in
Hmm.
North America, if not the world. I mean, the whole world was colonized by Great Britain
And
and other
what's
like in other parts of like Europe.
and what's the
So
importance of understanding identity in the context of our education, do you think?
I, I mean, in that sense, I mean, when I talk about reintegrating youth back into their identity, your deeper purpose is revealed. And sometimes you get that from fasting for 4 days and 4 nights out of the land. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you get that in a ceremony. Um, and sometimes it's learning how to take care of the ceremony. Because if you think about the identity, which is continuously demonized even today, and
Mm-hmm.
it's still trying to be stripped away. Um, if you take a youth and you reconnect them and you get them back into ceremony, there's this really beautiful thing that happens where you're you're sitting in the lodge or you're sitting in the ceremony and you're just like, man, not even like 20 years ago this was demonized. 30 years ago this was
Mm,
outlawed.
mm,
40 years, like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they were trying to kill us. They were trying to kill this whole thing. And when you're sitting in that ceremony, you feel that love, and then you have
right.
that purpose. Like then you have that I guess that responsibility to be a cultural carrier.
Mm.
It's super deep because that's I find the greatest success I've had with kids waking themselves up is reconnecting them back to spirit.
So, when we are looking at these ideas of reclaiming culture and in the work that you do in helping young people to integrate back into their cultural identities, um, what, how do you see the intersections between that work and helping young people reconnect or connect with their true sense of purpose?
It's hard because I don't know if the two aspects currently fit in um, Canadian culture right now. I think that in the mainstream of education, it's about cultural suppression and identity.
Mm-hmm.
But when you are helping a child to really look at themselves um, through their own cultural lens, and not through the lens of a European, not through the lens of a Canadian, but through the lens of like if they're Nehio or if they're Denisutane or if they're Nitsitapi, you know, it's a very different viewpoint. Um, it's a really hard thing to answer because there's just a huge conflict that pops up.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge conflict that pops up because nothing about what we're living in within Canada um, is to the benefit of Indigenous peoples at all. I mean, nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. Doesn't matter what we're doing or where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
There's that saying, like, and it almost goes for like every other nation out there. Like, you can be native, but you can't be too native if you're on a
Right.
job site.
Yeah.
Like, you can be black, but you can't be too black. You know. And then when you're a woke person or you're waking up and you look at the colonized world around you, you really do get feelings of anger, resentment, even being deflated, feeling like there's hopelessness, really,
Right.
to combat this huge machine that's going. Um,
And what,
it's interesting though.
yeah.
I think it's interesting because like the each generation that comes by is a little more entrenched in colonization, a little smarter than the last in terms of like Eurocentric lens,
Right.
and able to really decipher, diffuse, and just to take apart this system. And so it's the earlier it happens though for kids, I think it's better because they're not going to be so lost later on in life.
Right. Because when I think
I think
about, yeah, go ahead.
I just think like when you raise an indigenous person in the society to not appreciate, understand, or look into their culture, um, their own identity, they're lost. They're completely lost.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they begin to reconnect, they're really able to find themselves.
Right. Because I think understanding your identity is almost kind of a precursor or a journey that one must take in order to understand your true purpose in life. So I feel like the work that you're doing, you know, is very paramount and critical to the larger picture of what is being driven behind the PDE movement is an understanding that in order to kind of get youth and people to a place where they are truly standing in their purpose, you have to first kind of help that individual embrace who they are, including their cultural identity, including coming to a place of understanding of the historical context of where they come from, and being able to make peace with those things, or at least integrate into their own identity a sense of understanding the impact of those things, so that a process of healing can take place. Because also, when one is kind of entrenched in a lot of shame resulting from trauma, it holds you back from truly embracing your true purpose. It holds you back from being able to embrace your true identity for what it is, because there is a lot of shame that's surrounded around that. So Yeah, I see the work that you do as very integral and critical to kind of this larger picture. And ultimately, what I'm doing with this podcast is just that. It's almost like me entering into these different spheres and looking at how are all of these things connected, right? Because ultimately, the purpose of the education system should be to help our young people to lead more fulfilling lives, to find careers and a path in life that is going to help them to understand who they are and fulfill their purpose and fulfill their kind of mission in life and feel completed at the end of the day is the ultimate goal. We're all here on this earth searching for happiness. We're all searching
Yep.
for fulfilling life. And, these are the stepping stones, right? You can't get to a place of fully being in your purpose and kind of radiating that until you've been able to come to a place of being able to place your identity in a space that feels good for you, and that is integrated with an understanding that is sound and grounded in being able to place yourself within the larger context of the society that we live in, because ultimately that's
Yep.
how we define ourselves, right? By placing ourselves within the larger context. And it's only when you fully come to an understanding of what that is that you can then kind of transcend that to the place
Yep.
of understanding your true identity and purpose. So thank you for the
And that.
work that you do.
Oh no.
We
I
do kind of have to wrap because we are already running a little bit over time. But yeah, please share with us your last thoughts.
um, I think that uh, for like I can speak for the indigenous peoples that they're within the Blackfoot communities at least there was gender fluidity. So you had roles of males and females, and those that are in between or beyond what we can like, those constrictions. And I believe our culture helps us to our identity as Nehios or as Nitsitapi. They help us to appreciate and accept that role that we have as
Right,
men, as women, as beyond that.
right.
So yeah, that's I don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff we get into, but I just want to say thank you. I had a blast. You're awesome. I love what you're doing right now.
Thank you, thank you. And I mean, uh, the thing that I think is also really powerful that I just kind of also want to throw in here and mention is something that I've mentioned before in terms of the podcast is the connection between culturally responsive pedagogy that has kind of been mandated by at least the province of Ontario and the Ministry of Education within the province of Ontario, saying that it's really critical to our youth's educational development to create curriculum that speaks to, culturally relevant topics, and that our framework should be to look at it through that lens of creating our education system to be culturally responsive. And I think it's really easy to say that in a policy. It's another thing to kind of have it and deliver it in full integrity in real life. And that I think really does take work from cultural carriers, as you say, of people who have integrity within the cultures that are where our students are coming from. And so again, want to reiterate the importance of the partnership piece, right? Between teachers and schools and cultural carriers and people who come from various different backgrounds who can speak to the experience of our youth in a real authentic way. And I found that to be really powerful when I've observed your work because you take up that space with a lot of integrity. So I just want to thank you for doing that work.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you. I feel like there was something else you wanted to say. I can always edit it.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's cool. This is pretty much it. I mean, I love the fact that this dialogue is going on right now, and I love
Mm,
the fact that each people are going to add something different and unique to all of it. So
absolutely. Well, thank you for
great.
adding your piece. Um, this is Empowering Educators, a podcast about purpose-driven education, and just want to thank all of our listeners and viewers today for tuning in. My name is The Real Sun, and here representing Voice of Purpose, you were listening to Gitz. Gitz, what's your full name? How would you like to represent yourself? or just by Gitz?
Gitzy Guckaman. Gitz, it's short for Gitzy Guckaman, and the last name is Crazy Boy.
All right. Is there a little story behind your name?
It's how we express love between one another. Gitzy Guckaman means I'm wrapping my love around you.
Mm, beautiful. Well, thanks for joining us. Tune in next time and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.